turn on your projectors and follow me down the rabbit hole. JJ Hatter welcomes you to Analysis in Wonderland. Today's topic, the night before Christmas in Wonderland. Well, I wasn't expecting this to be released this year, but here we are. It's the holiday season, and with the wintertime celebrations well underway, I figured we might as well celebrate the return of this series by looking at a recent and fittingly festive piece of Wonderland-related media. I speak, of course, of the 2024 animated holiday film, The Night Before Christmas in Wonderland. Admittedly, I don't know a whole lot about the background of this film going into it. It was directed by Peter Bainton, an animator, illustrator, and film director who has released many projects since at least 2007. However, I haven't currently seen any of his other creations, so I can't really say how much this compares to his overall body of work. The film is based on a book of the same title, which was published in 2019, and is the work of one Caris Bexington. And as far as I was able to find, the only other books credited to her are a sequel to this story, called The Night Before Christmas in Neverland, and an unrelated book entitled Hot Cross Bunny. None of these three stories have been read by me, although I would very much like to at least get the two Christmas books on my personal shelf. I also know that the book was illustrated by one Kate Hindley, who also apparently had a big hand in helping guide the film's animation and artistic style, but once again, I am not familiar with any of Hindley's works beyond this point. I'm also not terribly familiar with most of the major cast members. I do know both Mawan Rizwan and Asim Chadri from their appearances in the game show Taskmaster, but that's really all I think I've seen them in off the top of my head. In this film, they play the roles of the Mad Hatter and March Hare, respectively. Lenny Rush, who plays a reindeer in training named Robin, I know for Taskmaster as well, and also played possibly the funniest Tiny Tim ever in one of the worst Christmas Carol adaptations I've ever seen. Sadly, that's about it for him too. I know Tom Allen, who plays the fish footman, barrister, from his appearance on the cooking show The Great British Bake Off. Even that sort of secondhand, as I've never actually seen the show. I simply know people who have. Emilia Clarke, the Queen of Hearts in this version, is pretty well known for her work on Game of Thrones, but I only really know her for her appearance in the movie Solo. I'm not a Game of Thrones fan. The list goes on and on. Mae Muller, Simone Ashley, Duncan Wisby, lots and lots of performers who are probably well known to others, but are not so familiar to me. The only exception is Gerard Butler, who plays the main character of Saint Nick. I am fairly well acquainted with Butler's work, having seen him in things like The 300, Dracula 2000, How to Train Your Dragon, the original, not the remake, Nim's Island, and quite a lot more. None of these roles would likely indicate he's a championing choice to play old Kris Kringle, and considering his only other musical credit I'm aware of is the film adaptation of Phantom of the Opera, which seems to be polarizing at best, it's a complete mystery how he got the part. On that note, in terms of the behind-the-scenes elements of the movie, what I can say is that apparently the movie was proposed originally as a simple half-hour special by producer Ruth Fielding, who had been introduced to the book the film is based on by a colleague, Camilla Deacon. They brought the idea to NBC Universal, who decided that the concept had enough meat to make it worthy of making into a feature-length production. Writer Sarah Daddy was brought in to man the screenplay, and another past collaborator of Fielding's, Guy Chambers, came on to handle the music. I don't know much else beyond that, however. I don't know why various other people got attached to the project, I don't know how long the project was in development, etc. In summary, I went into this Christmas special / Lewis Carroll reimagining pretty much completely blind. In fact, that was the joy of it. I had no preconceived notions of how good or bad this movie would be or what to expect from it, and I had no knowledge of its popularity or unpopularity before viewing it. On that note, having looked it up, the film is so new and seems so relatively under the radar that as of writing the script for this episode, it has not received a Wikipedia page, and on Rotten Tomatoes boasts obviously no scoring. I can, however, tell you that on IMDb it has a score of approximately 6 out of 10, so I guess that means it's at least acceptable in the eyes of most human beings who've seen it. The story focuses on Saint Nick, who receives a last-minute letter from the Princess of Wonderland asking him to get her a Bandersnatch for a pet as a Christmas gift. The kindly gift giver is more than happy to oblige, but it's made clear that he's apparently never been to Wonderland before, or at least hasn't been in a very long time. What becomes obvious to the audience pretty quickly, but takes Saint Nick a bit of time to find out, is that the princess has already grown up by the time Santa Claus receives her letter, and has become the villainous Queen of Hearts. Bitter about never being visited by St. Nick for so many years, she hates Christmas. Anyone who is caught celebrating it in Wonderland is tossed into the dungeon and eventually executed. When she finds out Santa is in her kingdom, the Queen becomes determined to take her revenge and destroy him. St. Nick, along with his lead reindeer Prancer and a little elf named Boots, must find a way to escape Wonderland and, if possible, change the Queen's heart. Now that I've given you all what little background I can give about the production and its plot, what do I think of this movie? We'll begin by discussing the characters, and since Gerard Butler is the only actor I'm really strongly familiar with in this version, and he plays the main character, and it is Christmas time, let's start with St. Nick himself. While I have absolutely no clue why or how the decision to cast King Leonidas as Santa became a thing, I'll come right out and say it. This is probably one of my favorite versions of Santa I've seen, at least in recent years. Butler described his take on the character as, and I quote, glam, kind of a rock star. I can definitely see where he's coming from. Not only does it show in the musical numbers, most notably the big opening song Showtime, but also in terms of the character's personality. St. Nick in this version is a jolly old soul, make no mistake, but he's also got a bit of an ego. In his own words, I make the laws 'cause I'm Santa Claus. Throughout the film, it's made clear that he's gotten a little too full of himself and his own hype, and has trouble listening to reason or paying attention to people who are trying to help him. If he wants to do something, he'll do it, no matter how ill-advised. In a way, he's a little bit like the Queen herself with her selfish behavior. Both are people who won't take no for an answer. However, what I find particularly special about this version of St. Nick, and the way that flaw is depicted, as well as what separates him from the Queen, is that he still comes from a place of kindness and love. Santa is basically a big, dumb, sweethearted puppy of a man in this version. A Yuletide golden retriever on two legs. He's not very bright, he's a bit clumsy, but he's just so enthusiastic and absolutely loves making people happy. When things go their absolute most wrong towards the end of the film, and he falls into a depressive funk for a short time, his grief isn't because his ego has been bruised, or even because he's worried about Christmas in general, but because he specifically realizes he failed in his great mission. In his mind, he failed to make someone happy, to give them the love and the joy they needed, and as a result, nothing seems able to pull him out again. Even when everyone else is celebrating triumphantly, he still seems solemn and sad. It's not till he's able to find a chance to make up for his own self-presumed mistake and give that one person the joy they needed that he finally goes back to his merry old self. He truly wants everyone to enjoy the holidays, and everyone means everyone. In a way, his great flaw is that he's just too nice. He's much too trusting in other people and in the cockeyed optimistic belief that just because it's Christmas and he's Santa Claus, everyone's going to do the right thing and be good regardless. By the end of the film, he learns that he really needs to listen to people more, and that Christmas truly is a team effort. He can't take people and their advice for granted if he truly wants to make it a happy holiday. Before I move on to any other characters, I want to touch on Butler's singing performance. In Phantom of the Opera, a big part of the flack Butler has gotten comes from his vocal abilities and music. Like I said, the reactions people have to his work there seems to be polarizing. Some people think he does a good job, others feel he's woefully miscast. I won't comment on my own feelings, but I will say this. I think his job in this movie is much, much easier to appreciate. The main reason is simply because his vocal style matches the musical style better. Phantom is largely performed in a grand, sweeping, and, well, operatic fashion, and Butler's rocky, somewhat imperfect voice isn't necessarily the best match to it. That's where a lot of the problems people have with his work comes from. In this movie, however, the music has a sort of pop and jazz combo to its style, and Butler's voice matches it up much better. He's also very good at acting through the music, and brings so much excitement and pizzazz to the role in his singing scenes, the imperfections don't really matter. So if you're someone who didn't like him as the Phantom, maybe you'll find his performance as Santa Claus ironically more suitable singing-wise. In direct contrast to this happy-go-lucky persona are the 8 famous reindeer: Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, you know the drill. Prancer gets the most focus as the lead reindeer and the one who becomes St. Nick's sidekick on their journey. However, the reindeer as a whole group are wonderful in that they act as this sort of cynical counterpoint to St. Nick's over-idealistic personality. It's made obvious right from the word go that these reindeer have had to put up with a lot from their boss over the years. In what I think is a reference to the fact so many Christmas stories feature Santa getting into some sort of trouble and needing to be rescued at some point, the reindeer have actually gotten him an SOS alarm to try and keep him out of danger after putting up with so many near misses in the past, which St. Nick unfortunately misuses. Eventually, this misuse comes back to bite him in his big red butt when he finds he really needs it and hasn't got it with him. Oops. This leads to a comedic subplot where Robin, the reindeer in training, goes on a cross-country trip to try and get the alarm to Santa, but this subplot and his character are generally peripheral in the grand scheme of things. The rest of the reindeer are constantly sniping at St. Nick's dim-witted bumbling, but you can tell they genuinely care for him, and he cares for them too. By the end of the film, not only has he learned that he does need to listen to them more, but the reindeer acknowledge that no matter how many mistakes he makes, his heart is always in the right place, and they resolve to try and be more accepting and understanding in the future. This actually acts as a good segue to the Wonderland characters and their world. As you can probably imagine, this is a more light-hearted and child-friendly take on Wonderland generally speaking, but what I love is that the fact it is such a fun and silly place is kind of a sort of mini twist, if you will, in the plot. When the reindeer find out they're going to Wonderland, they try to talk St. Nick out of it, with the Mysterioso-infused tune that warns him of how everyone in Wonderland is mad and it's filled with monsters. Once we actually get to Wonderland, however, we find that it's really not as bad as the reindeer seem ready to believe. Yes, everyone there is a few slices short of a full pie, but even creatures like the Bandersnatch are depicted as generally friendly and fun. They may all be crazy, but most of them aren't evil. They just like having a good time and are just as much in love with the Christmas season as anybody else. The only exception to this enjoyment of frivolity, of course, is the Queen, and just like with St. Nick, this is actually one of my favorite versions of the character I've gotten to see in a while. Again, I'm not really familiar with Emilia Clarke, her voice actor overall, but I can definitely say her take on the Queen of Hearts is a winning interpretation. This is a spot-on take of the character. She swings back and forth from an overgrown toddler getting grumpy about not having her way to a sassy and sadistic madwoman who clearly delights in causing misery for others and having a chance to exert her power. She's one of those villains who just has so much fun being mean, you can't help but kind of laugh devilishly alongside her. At the same time, there is a vulnerability to this version of the Queen. It's implied that it's not just the fact Santa never got her a pet that makes her turn out the way she does. That's more the tipping point than anything else. During flashback sequences with her younger self, it's indicated that as a little girl, the Queen, then the princess, felt kind of stifled by her regal upbringing. She was lonely. And while her father seems like he was a fairly decent fellow, we never meet her mother, and what little we know about her kind of leads one to think she might not have always had the most loving relationship with her. When you tie that loneliness, that lack of something necessary in her life, and the simple fact that year after year she never got what she truly wanted from St. Nick, all at a time when everyone else is having wonderful fun with the people and things they love most, it's not entirely surprising she ended up warped. In typical holiday special fashion, the Queen ultimately goes through a redemption arc, and eventually decides to change her ways and become a more kind and just ruler. Not just at Christmas time, but every day of the year. Scrooge would approve. As for the rest of the Wonderland characters who appear, they're all handled pretty well, but to be honest, there's not a whole lot to say about them. They're not depicted in a way that's offensive, mind you, they just never go beyond the call of duty. The Mad Hatter and the March Hare are zany and bonkers as ever, the White Rabbit is his usual panicky self, etc. The only ones I can really comment on are Alice and the Cheshire Cat. For the latter, the cat in this version is weirdly enough depicted as the Queen's current pet, although she never really seems to show him much affection, I should point out, and is essentially a kinder version of Lucifer from Disney's Cinderella. He's a pantomime character who spends most of his time scaring Boots the elf, who is no bigger than a mouse compared to him, and seems to delight in getting other people in trouble. However, it seems this is less because the cat is evil, and more just that he's a mischievous prankster, as is common, and by the end he and Boots even seem to become friends. As for Alice, she's surprisingly placed on the sidelines for most of the movie, but does become instrumental in the last third or so. It is she, not Saint Nick, who helps the Queen realize the joy of the holiday season again and find the goodness inside her once more. The Queen also comments that Alice reminds her of herself. Beyond that, though, there's not a ton else to add. Again, none of the Wonderland cast are done badly. There are just so many other versions out there already, it takes a lot for any interpretation to really stand out among the crowd. The animation in this movie is one of my favorite things about it. I don't know how much input and influence Kate Hindley had on the creative team, but they definitely tried their best to stick true to her vision based on what I've seen of the book's illustrative work. The whole thing really does feel like a storybook come to life, with its details and simply the way it all moves. Hindley's visual style is both very unique and yet also familiar. It's difficult to describe, but it's a type of illustration and art I've seen before, yet can't quite put my finger on. It reminds me of several things I've seen in the past, but at the same time, it's totally its own. The colors are probably one of my favorite elements. Very rich and bold, yet never gaudy or garish, able to capture both the whimsy of Wonderland and the atmosphere of the idealized Christmas season perfectly. And in the scenes where we are in the real world, in the subplot with Robin, the more drab and low-key colors used to represent that only help to enhance the contrast and heighten the magic everywhere else. The music and songs are really fun and catchy. I'm especially fond of the tunes Topsy-Turvy World and Cool to Be Kind, and generally serve their purpose well, though again, I don't think I have a whole lot to say about them. One very interesting point, though, is that nearly the entire special is told in rhyme. Aside from a few sort of side jokes that were probably ad-libbed by the comedians and actors playing so many of these roles, and a specific part where Saint Nick gets so upset he can't even seem to rhyme anymore, the whole thing is told in verse, and it never once feels aggravating or badly handled. On that note, I absolutely love the sense of humor shown throughout this movie. First of all, there's a lot of great visual gags and moments of animated humor to be found. Meanwhile, on the writing front, there's lots of bits of meta humor and great sarcastic one-liners from the Reindeer especially that really make me chuckle throughout the piece. Overall, I think this is a pretty decent Christmas special, as well as a fairly well-managed take on Wonderland and its denizens. I can't lie and say it's my new favorite holiday movie or anything, but it's definitely one that does its job well. I don't think it's something that's going to change people's lives or become a thing that many people watch every single Christmas ad nauseam, but it's definitely worth seeing at least a time or two, especially if you're an Alice fan. And if you aren't an Alice fan, it may still have some fun surprises in store for you to appreciate. And so we come to the conclusions. I had to debate a bit, but I'm going to give this a decimal point rating, 6.5 out of 10. Like I just said, this isn't by any means the greatest thing to ever be tied to the Lewis Carroll classics, or to Christmas for that matter, but it's not doing anything wrong. It's totally and completely acceptable, and in some places goes beyond even that to create something special and quite unique. It blends the worlds and ideas it plays with beautifully, and has a lot of heart as well as a lot of humor. It keeps the joy of both the season and the stories tucked away in its center, while making sure almost nothing is held sacred. I definitely can recommend it if you're in the mood to see something fun, beautifully crafted, and just a little bit insane this holiday season. Top 6 performances and characters. Number 6, Simone Ashley as Alice. Again, there's not a whole lot to say about this take on Alice, but I do like how, even in a special with Saint Nick as the main character, it's Alice who acts as the voice of reason and ultimately is the one to truly save the day. She's neither as giddy as Santa nor as cynical as the Queen or even the Reindeer, and it's her combination of simple logic and goodwill that eventually wins the villain over in the end. Number 5, the Cheshire Cat. It's interesting to see a purely pantomime mute take on this character in animation, and I love what a little trickster he is. You get the feeling he stays with the Queen not out of love and loyalty, but simply because she allows him to get away with a lot since his trickery leads to her getting her way. Similarly, the Queen seems to keep him around because he's useful to her, so it's a mutual arrangement. Yet again, the cat never really feels like he's evil, just a little bundle of self-absorbed chaos. I think anybody who has ever owned a cat can relate to that idea. Number 4, Mae Muller as Prancer. Again, all of the reindeer are wonderfully sarcastic and have a lot of great moments, but as the leader of the bunch, Prancer gets the most development and focus. I love how constantly over it they are around Saint Nick, with all the eye rolls to the audience and the endless amounts of biting, sardonic humor in their lines. You can just feel how they're begging for a cup of carrot coffee or something to survive through their job, especially as the wackiness of Wonderland gets on their nerves. Again, though, at the end of the day, they do still care and aren't completely without love of their own for the season. Number 3, Milwan Rizwan as the Mad Hatter. I think the main reason this goofy little haberdasher gets into my top 3 is partially just due to personal bias. As I've said in the past, the Hatter is my favorite Wonderland character, and the fact that I think his song Topsy Turvy World is my favorite in the whole movie. I also love the design of this character, especially with him being one of the smallest figures in the film, in direct contrast to the March Hare, who is the single tallest. Number 2, Gerard Butler as Saint Nick. I will never understand who decided on this casting choice, but I'm glad the choice was made. Again, Butler is probably one of my new favorite Santas, and his dopey but oh so earnest personality is a big part of why. I just love how he's so eager and genuine in his desire to make others smile and bring the Christmas season to everyone, and while he sometimes gets a bit big for his britches, it's never in a way that feels annoying or overly arrogant. He's simply Santa Claus, and he knows his reputation. It's a very fun and sweet take on the character, and one I hope a lot more people enjoy as much as I do someday. And number 1, Amelia Clark as the Queen of Hearts. Like I said, this is one of my new favorite versions of the Queen, and considering how many different takes on Wonderland and this character I've seen by now, that's saying a lot. The Queen is by far the most dynamic character in the film, with the most layers to her personality and the most interesting story arc. She's funny, she's wicked, she's sympathetic, she's dangerous, she's everything you could want out of this character and a villain of this nature in general. Alongside the reindeer, she also has most of my favorite written jokes in the film. I guess I'm a bit of a cynic myself at heart. What other wonders await you down the rabbit hole? Tune in next time to find out. This is JJ Hatter, and never forget, we're all mad here. Happy holidays!